I have the honor and privilege to introduce our speaker today. He is Major Bobbie L. Ragsdale III. He graduated from West Point in 2007 and was the class president. He received a master's from Harvard Kennedy School of Public Administration in 2016. As an active duty Army officer, he had command, staff, interagency experience. Major Ragsdale set himself apart with a unique skill set defined by lethal and non-lethal, conventional and special operations during his development or deployment to Iraq and Afghanistan. He was in command of the Army's only airborne armored cavalry troop. Transitioning to his present position, he was appointed by Governor John Bel Edwards and confirmed by the Louisiana State Senate as the Louisiana State Commissioner of Veteran Affairs, working across public and private sectors to promote lives and opportunities of Louisiana's nearly 300,000 veterans. Major Ragsdale today will talk about veterans issues in the state, including a short update on the state of legislation in the current session. The majority of his presentation today will be the story of Damon Rocky Gause, who in World War II twice escaped Japanese capture and successfully fled the occupied Philippines to Australia by boat. He will also have some copies of his book on the subject available for purchase and signing. It is my privilege and honor to introduce this wonderful member of our Post 23, Major Ragsdale. Thank you, sir. You're welcome, sir. Thank you.
Hey everybody, thanks so much for having me. First, thanks Grevy, appreciate that. Mostly accurate encapsulation of my LinkedIn profile bio. For those of you who don't know me, I think most of you I've either met or we've known each other for a while. I've been a member of this post for, I don't know, a little while now. I am Bobbie Ragsdale. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here. My day job is working for your tax dollars, thanks taxpayers, as the Assistant Chief of Staff for Civil Military Operations for the 377th Theater Sustainment Command, which is the largest two-star command in the Department of Defense, by the way. It's about 34,000 soldiers and civilians spread across 33 states, and it's the primary logistics provider for all federal DoD forces whenever they're operating in North America. It's a really exciting mission. I'm glad to do it. On behalf of General Swanson, who is my boss, he could not be here today, but he sends his regards, and I thank him personally for allowing me to be away from work to be here with you, although it should be noted that as I work for the government, nothing I do is actually important. So, I want to give you an interesting story here, but before I do, as Grevy said, I have a second hat as well, and I work, it's totally volunteer. I work with the Secretary of Veterans Affairs and the governor and the state to advocate for and communicate with and just generally be a speakerphone and a mouthpiece for the veterans across the states. The Louisiana Department of Veterans Affairs, you may or may not be aware, not the same as the Federal Department of Veterans Affairs. That is the federal government. It's its whole own animal. That's what runs the hospitals and what most of you are probably familiar with. They give you your VA rating. We have nothing to do with that. So if you didn't get what you wanted, I'm sorry, I can't help you with that. I say that, actually we can help you with that because we help advocate for you, and whereas the VA, the federal VA, great guys, love them, patriots, may have different incentives to try and mitigate the rating that you get or the care that you receive or whatever, but the state has a mission to advocate for you, help communicate your benefits, and help get you the ratings and the benefits that you deserve and that you earn through your service. We operate cemeteries across the state. We operate veterans homes across the state. We also have in every single parish a veterans assistance coordinator who you can go to as a first line point of contact with any issues that you have, and their job is to help you fill out your VA rating packet. They're able to help connect you with your tax benefits, with your tuition benefits, with whatever it is that you need in the veteran space. Go talk to those guys, because that's what the state pays them to be there to do. Right now, the legislature is in session. There's a couple of things going through right now. We're trying to push through some enhanced benefits under Title 12, which is tuition assistance and tuition payments. We're reducing the occupancy requirement from 2 years to 1 year to try and get people their benefits faster. We're also working with those parishes to try and get them to clean up some of those VAC offices. Some of them may be in like back corners in the parish office somewhere. So we really want them in a nicer place so you're comfortable going and receiving care or receiving counsel there. We're trying to create 2 new positions, an Assistant Secretary of Military Affairs and a Director of Veterans Health Affairs. And there are 2 competing bills right now in the legislature regarding the advocacy for veterans with regard to filing VA claims. So in some states, in some places, maybe you've seen it, people will take money in order to advocate for you. Like, hey, give me a percentage of your payments or a flat fee and I'll file your paperwork and then I'll go fight your claim for you to the VA. These people can provide a valuable service, but there's a feeling that maybe they're a little predatory. So there's 2, like I said, competing laws. One of them is being advanced that would just say that no one can receive compensation for helping you advocate for your VA rating, and a competing law says you can, but then it puts guardrails on it to make it safer for the veteran to avoid predatory experiences. And there's pros and cons to each, and we don't take an official position on it, but you should know that those bills are out there. That being said, again, I wear 2 hats. That's a separate job. If you have any issues, any questions, any veterans you know that are not getting what they need, or they have questions or anything, please come talk to me. I have a great relationship with Fernando Rivera, who runs the VA hospital here in New Orleans. If you've got any issues with what's going on over there, bring it to me. I'll bring it straight to Fernando. I've never struck out on that. He always takes care of us. And we're really very fortunate, by the way. I know I kind of just talked a little smack on the VA, but they're great. And the VA facility here in New Orleans is terrific, one of the best in the country. So you're very, very, very fortunate to be in an environment where you have access to that kind of care. Okay, shifting topics. So I want to tell you a story. I wrote a chapter for a book a few years ago about this gentleman right here. Pretty remarkable story. I had planned to have some copies of that book for you. You could pick them up if you wanted to. When I dug them out of my house the other day, I found my house, actually. I had my roof peeled off in Hurricane Ida, still fixing it. Turns out that a number of those books were like wet and covered in like a fine sheetrock dust. So if you need to have some, I have some in my trunk right now. But like, maybe we need to wait for the next run. Just let me know. But so Damon Gause here, Rocky Gause, really interesting story. So this gentleman right here, born in 1915, and as a young man, he was a boxer, a race car driver, and he was a privately taught pilot. He was only about 5'5", 165 pounds, not what you would generally expect of like the picturesque American GI, but neither was Audie Murphy. He decided he wanted to enlist in the Coast Guard. Right, so he dropped out of college, gets on a cutter, and becomes a radioman. Picks up a lot of skills of the sea while he's doing that. As soon as his enlistment ends with the Coast Guard, he turns right around and enlists in the Army Air Corps as a radioman. And he spends some time out in the Panama Canal Zone. After that enlistment ends, he goes to work for an oil company in South America, picks up a little Spanish. But in 1941, he starts to see the writing on the wall as things escalate in Europe, and he decides to join the Army Air Corps for a second time, his third period of service, but this time he's going to sign up as a pilot. So he becomes a dive bomber pilot, and in short order, he's sent over to the Philippines. Now, just before that happens, he runs off with his girlfriend, Ruth, against her father's wishes and elopes, but 2 weeks later, he's in Manila. So this is where they sent him to, Fort McKinley, which is nowadays, it's got a different name, I can't remember right now, but it's one of the bases of operations for the Philippine government. We were building an airfield there. So he shows up, remember he's a dive bomber pilot, and he's on kind of the torch party. He gets there before anyone else, or at least before his equipment shows up. So he's got no airplanes to fly. They got some machine guns, they got radios, they got tents, and this is early December 1941. Some of you may remember what happens in early December 1941. He is minding his own business, walking along the airfield, and suddenly they get radio broadcasts of what's happening in Hawaii, and mere minutes later, bombs start dropping on Manila. So the situation gets pretty hairy. There's about 2 weeks of constant attacks. Now again, there's no airplanes. They're pilots, so what do? They start ad hocing some kind of a defense. So Rocky here ends up on a radio detachment, because he's done a couple of tours as a radio, and he's trying to do communications, build up antennas so they can at least talk to each other. Bombs are falling in the streets. Civilian casualties are high. There's actually an incident where he runs out and he sees this woman bleeding in the street, picks her up, her name is Rita, carries her to a hospital to treat her wounds, and then returns to duty. After about 2 weeks, the Americans start to realize that the situation is no longer tenable in Manila, especially as the Japanese land on the north of Luzon Island, which is the big island of the Philippines is Luzon. So Manila's down here in the south, the Japanese are coming in the north, so they start evacuating to Bataan, which is a name that might resonate with some of you. Bataan is the peninsula you'll see over here on the left. So as they're evacuating over there, Rocky is running convoys back and forth into Manila to grab supplies. There's about 5,000 people that natively live in this part of Bataan, but there's not a lot in the way of supplies, food, fuel. So he's running back and forth trying to support the evacuation and bolster the defenses there. But the Japanese start getting closer and closer, and they realize that pretty soon they're going to have to shut down this convoy. So it's New Year's Eve on 1941, and he's making supply runs in, and he runs into no less than Rita, the girl he pulled out of the street, who's like, hey, why don't you come to this party we're having at the Hotel Manila? It's like the Ritz of Manila. And it's a barn burner because they know what's coming. So they're going to drink all the booze in the house. They're going to eat all the food. They're going to have a grand old time before the Japanese get there. So he goes out there, gets blitzed with Rita and a bunch of friends, and then they basically shut off the lights. He gets in a truck and they drive the very last convoy out of Manila. They actually encounter some Japanese on the way, but sort of deftly evade them. And then they set up a defensive line right through the middle of Bataan. And that's where they stay for a period of weeks. At this point, Rocky takes command of a machine gun company. So you got all these aircraft machine gunners and all the machine guns with, by the way, no aircraft and no airfield. So what do? You turn them into infantrymen. So he becomes a machine gun company commander, and they set up a defensive position on the eastern side of the island, kind of between Balenga and Orion there. And he's running supply convoys down to the southern tip of the island at this point. Because remember, Manila's cut off, but they've got supplies coming in from the south. So he would go down there to a quartermaster point, get supplies, and bring them back up. At this point, the people are starting to get starving as the supplies run out. So they've eaten all the food that's there. They've eaten all the food they can bring in. They start hunting the wildlife. There's caribou. Suddenly there's less caribou. Then there's less water buffalo. There's less horses, less dogs and cats. All of a sudden, the situation is getting really, really bad. And one day, so he's on his way down to the south. This is actually April 9th, 1942. So again, we went from December, New Year's Eve, to April 9th. They've been trying to fight this thing out, and the situation has not gotten any better. The Japanese aggression has stood up. So Rocky heads on down to the south of the island, or south of the peninsula, to get supplies. And while he's gone, the Japanese break through. But he doesn't know that until he discovers it on the ride back. So on the drive back on this road, they get to a bridge, and he sees a truck that he's not familiar with. And they don't know who he is. But very quickly he realizes it's a Japanese machine gun truck. And he does a quick estimation of the situation. He says, okay, I've got a gun truck in front of me, and I am 1.5 tons full of beans. I don't think I'm going to win this fight. So he and his sergeant that he took with him, Sergeant Wilmer, they dive into the river. So they run across the bridge and dive down into the water, which is like 20, 40 feet below, and it's shallow water, and they dash upon the rocks. Now, the whole way they're running, the Japanese realize what's happening. They open fire. They don't hit them. Then, because of the way the turrets are mounted on the gun truck, they can't aim down the bridge to shoot them in the water. So they start drifting down the stream a little bit. Both their revolvers are lost. They fall out of their holsters when they hit the rocks. and they're drifting, and so the Japanese get out of the truck, and with the rifles they try to shoot, but luckily they can't shoot, so they miss them. And so they drift down a couple of miles and then kind of hide under like a mangrove in a root structure and just tuck in as tight as they can so just their noses and eyes are showing. And at this point it's getting dark, and the Japanese are hunting for them because they know they're there. So they got patrols going out, they've got flashlights, they can't see them, they start stabbing into the water with bayonets. One misses Rocky's head by a few inches, but they don't find him. At about 4 a.m., they peel off their jackets, their shirts, and they leave their boots, which are, by the way, stuck in the mud. They can't even get their boots out. And they decide they're going to make their way out to the mouth of the river. So you can't really see it on the map because we're zoomed out too far, but the river runs east-west. So it dumps off into the Manila Bay on the west, or on the eastern side. So they figure, we're going to go to the west, we're going to get to the mouth of the river, and then we're going to bound south back to that quartermaster point, which they don't know, but that thing is gone. So they're going to try and link back up. As they get toward a sandbar at the mouth of the river, they hear and see a patrol of Japanese laughing and joking, walking across the sandbar. So they get down real low, they become still, they pretend to be logs, and then the Japanese pass along. They realize now the sun is starting to rise. They're not going to get very far. So they retreat back to the shoreline like they had the night before, and they wait there for another full day, starving, breathing through their noses above the water, and waiting for nightfall again. Once nightfall comes, they make their way back out to the mouth. They decide they're going to go overland at this point. So they get back on the shore and they're going to cut across. But what they don't realize is that there's an entire Japanese encampment now. And so they're going to try and bound south, but they get into this camp and they're trying to tiptoe and creep through, and there's Japanese everywhere. So no one notices them until someone does notice them and says, hey, what are you guys? But, in Japanese. So they fall to the ground, and the Japanese start looking for something. But so Rocky actually spoons up next to another Japanese soldier who's sleeping on the ground on a sleeping mat and pulls his blanket over him. So now they're snuggled up together, but the Japanese soldier is so exhausted, he's asleep, doesn't wake up. His sergeant does the same thing. They wait there about an hour with blankets over their head. They pull off the blanket, they start low crawling. After about an hour or two, they've gone 1,000 feet, they're out of the camp, they go back to the water. They say, well, this overland thing is not going to happen. So they get back into the water and they're trying to bound around in the surf. Now as they're going, there's searchlights periodically coming out, so they have to duck under the water. There's also a lot of coral reef here, so this is not Gulf Shores. This is a very rocky, hostile beach. There's coral, it's sharp, and they're bleeding as they go because they keep cutting their feet and their legs, and that is leaving behind them a trail of blood. And if you know anything about that part of the Pacific Ocean, a trail of blood attracts a certain sort of predator, which eventually found his sergeant. And he didn't scream because he didn't want to give up their location. He just vanished into the surf. And suddenly, Lieutenant Gause is on his own in the surf in an occupied area. So after a little while, he keeps on going further south, and as we get to the end of that arrow there, he decides to come on shore, and he's kind of delirious, but he's trying to figure out what to do next. He wanders into a Filipino native who takes him and says, you're an American, I'm going to help you. Brings him to a house, gives him some food, gives him a little rest. He feels strong. He says, okay, I'm going to go out and find some Americans. Leaves the house, immediately runs into a Japanese patrol. They slap him in the face, punch him, he falls down, he stands up, shows him his wings. He says, I'm an American pilot. Like that's going to mean anything. So they butt stroke him in the face and lead him at the point of a bayonet to find the other Americans he'd been looking for, which are huddled up about 300 strong in a POW camp makeshift on the beach. I say camp, it's really like a field with about 300 Americans in the middle, back to back, no food, no supplies, and guards all around the outside. They've been there since April 9th, and their spirit is already broken. The Japanese were really abusive. They were bayoneting some of them. So the situation was really bad, but he's like, hey guys, we got to escape. How are we going to escape? And they're like, listen, there is no escape. We're done. We got to. So he's not liking that. So he realizes he's on his own. He starts watching the patterns of the guards. And he sees this guard that's walking and walking, and he decides he's got a rifle on his back. He's going to bum rush this guy. So he runs out as fast as he can when he's isolated, jumps on his back and tries to strangle him and choke him out. The guard starts screaming, trying to get to his rifle, can't. Rocky pulls the bayonet from the Japanese guard and plunges it into his ribs a couple of times. The guard drops, and then Lieutenant Gause starts sprinting through the jungle to the shoreline. He said, Jesse Owens had nothing on me. I was breaking brush and barefoot just hauling. He said he was already through the jungle onto the beach, and he had dove into the water before they had any idea what had happened. He's about 100 yards out in the water before I lost my thing here. Okay. Before the Japanese even caught up. They're taking shots at him in the water, but he actually swims 3 miles offshore to American-controlled Corregidor. Remember, he's starving. It's been several days at this point. He actually stops I think there was like an abandoned skiff or something in the middle. He stops there to rest, then gets up, swims the other 1.5 miles or so, passes out on Corregidor, is discovered by a Marine patrol. They bring him to sickbay. After about 48 hours, he convincingly argues that he must be returned to battle because Rocky Gause is a killer of men, and he just can't get out of the battle. So after 48 hours, they put him back in charge of another machine gun company. This is Marines at this point. So he takes a Marine company on Corregidor, and they're just constantly shelling the island, trying to prepare for an attack there. Corregidor is like a fortress, but it's turned into what he said was the pockmarked surface of the moon. And then there was a sustained bombardment just before May 5th. The Japanese land on May 5th, and the Americans start preparing for surrender. So Rocky, at this point, who had picked up a lieutenant from the Filipino army, Lieutenant Aranzazo, and he was like his XO, I guess. They go to the battalion command and they say, listen, I just escaped from a Japanese POW camp. They have my service number. They have my description. I killed the guard on the way out. If they capture me again, it's the end of its taps for me. And the battalion commander says, I'm not telling you what to do, but I understand. Bon voyage. So he and Lieutenant Aranzazo steal a canoe, and they decide that they're going to canoe themselves over back to Luzon. On the way, they pick up another Filipino scout. But as the night drags on, it's about 11 miles across the water there. As the night drags on, they get strafed by a Japanese fighter. The canoe capsizes and sinks. Lieutenant Aranzazo is shot in the back. He also can't swim. So Rocky and this Filipino scout build him like a raft, basically with 2 oars, and they swim him together. So the 2 of them swimming, the lieutenant, trying to get close to the shore. They get pretty close to the shore, 300 yards out, and they're caught in rip currents. And they just cannot break through the rip currents to get to the shore. Hours and hours go by. It's daytime now, and they're stranded on the island. They start calling out to the Japanese patrols to rescue them, the ones they had just escaped, because they think they're going to die for sure. No Japanese come. Finally, the scout says, well, maybe we all can't swim to shore carrying the lieutenant, but I can go by myself, and I'll bring back help. So he swims off into the distance, appears to be making good progress, and is never heard from again. After another several hours, the Filipino lieutenant, the situation is not getting any better. He pulls a purse of money out of his belt and he gives it to Rocky. He says, bring this to my mother. Tell her that I wanted to take care of her and that you need to do this for me. And he's like, no, you can do it yourself. You can do it yourself. No, this is what's happening. Gives him the money and he says, sir, my time is up. And he puts his arms in the air and he sinks between the oars and disappears under the surf. Rocky tries to find him, can't find him. Now he's alone again, in the surf, fighting the rip currents. Through a Herculean effort, he finds a way to swim by himself to the shore, and he passes out, basically dead to the world, and to the Japanese, who then stumble across this American slumped in the surf. They think he's dead. So Rocky wakes up to boots in his ribs and on his back and his head because they're kicking what they think is the dead body of an American. Now, luckily, they didn't bayonet him, but he just figures, okay, I'm going to play dead until they walk away. They walk away after a while, kind of laughing and joking. It's the pre-dawn hours. It's still dark, so they can't really see any signs of life in him. After they're gone, he picks himself up, bruised and broken, wanders into the jungle, finds a Japanese camp that is not yet awake, creeps around, steals a khaki shirt that is on a railing, And just then, you've got people like peeking through curtains, like what is going on? So he puts the shirt on and he runs off into the jungle. He tears a couple of shirt sleeves and makes himself makeshift shoes out of the khaki shirt sleeves. Wanders the jungle for 2 or 3 days. Every time a patrol or something comes by, he would hop into the woods until at one point he jumps into the woods and he was unable to evade whoever was there. And so he jumps out and he tries to fight him. But he's got no more strength than a child. Can't even hurt a child, which is fortunate because it was a child that found him. The child grabs him, says in perfect English, "You're an American. I'm going to help you." So they bring him to a hut in the middle of the jungle. Do I have that one yet? Yeah, so right about here, they bring him to a hut in the middle of the jungle, and they take care of him. He passes out for like 48 hours again. They shave him. They feed him. When he wakes up, who do you think he sees? Rita, the girl he rescued from the attack back in the very beginning. It was her family had found him, and so they hid him during the day in a shed behind the house. We had like a big, like a basket of rice, basically, and they would bury him up to his eyeballs in the rice. So the patrols come by, they wouldn't find him. He would get out at night in the dark, and they would eat, and so he stayed there for a few days, but he realized after about 10 days that he's putting them in danger every moment he's there, and he's like, I've got to get back to the Americans. So Rita vows that she's going to take him to a place where they can sail for freedom. So first thing they do, they go to find Lieutenant Arrazozo's mother. They give her the money. She offers to keep him for the, like, you stay here for the duration of the war. Like, no, no, no. They go on, they head down to Belayan Bay, right here, where the Japanese are hot on their heels. There's a patrol coming into town, so they can't even stay the night. They immediately hop on a canoe, and they're going to head over to Mindoro, which is the island right there. Except they don't make it to Mindoro. They get sidetracked and they go to Lubang. They see Lubang in the distance. They say, okay, we're going to stay there for a little while and rest. And they end up staying there for about 3 months. So then they're at Lubang. Lubang is run by this guy, Jose Ramos, who is a Spaniard, like from Spain. Remember, the Philippines had been occupied by the Spanish not long ago. And he's like a contractor. So he's got this like work crew, and he's almost like a mob boss. So he's like, oh, hey, I'm going to take care of you guys. Has his workers build them a bamboo hut. They have a swimming pool. They're up on the top of a mountain. They're living like kings, basically. They got coffee and food. And after about a month or so, the Jose there says to Rocky, hey, how would you like to go take a trip over to Manila? Now, the Spanish were neutral in the war, so the Spaniards had free travel. They could go and they did business. And Rocky had a plan. He wanted to get a message to General Wainwright, who was a POW in Manila at the time. He's like, I can get the message from Wainwright, I can hand carry it to MacArthur, and I'll be a hero. So he says, okay, I'm going to do it. But he speaks Spanish like an American who learned Spanish in South America and not like a Filipino Spanish. So he's trying to pick up the accent. It's not working. So they decide he's just going to stick with si, senor, and no, and nothing else. And they give Damon Gause the fake name Raymond Gause. Jose was not the cleverest of folks. But they give him that, so they head over to Manila for this trip. They go see where Wainwright is held. It's in a hotel. Realize very quickly that that ain't happening. So they turn around to chase this waitress that Jose has his eye on, and they go to some nightclub. So they're hanging out. By the way, Rocky's in like a sharkskin suit and a hat, like a fedora hat, like trying to blend in like a Spaniard. So they're at this bar, and who comes in and sits next to them? But at the next table is a Japanese colonel and a captain. And it could have been like, if you've seen Inglourious Bastards, it's the same story. Those guys come over and they're like, how about a drink? And so they jump right into, first they start talking in English. And so Rocky figures, okay, well, if I could pretend I don't speak English, I can probably blend in. But then they immediately shift to perfect Spanish, better than his Spanish. And he's a Spaniard. So like, what is he gonna do here? So he comes up with this strategy that every time they ask him something, he just goes, and sips and giggles. And they start to have kind of a low opinion of him as he figures he can speak drunk in any language. So that goes on for the course of the night. They kind of dismiss him. As the night winds down, they offer them a ride back to their hotel in the Japanese staff car. So Rocky tries very hard to avoid this course of action, but they're very insistent. So he sits in the backseat of this Japanese staff car between the colonel and the captain, pretending to sleep with his chin on his chest until they get to the hotel. When they get there, Jose is like, hey, wasn't that a good time? He says, no. And you can stay here in Manila if you want, but I'm going back. So he jumps on the boat, and he says, I'm done with Manila. I'm going back to Lubang. While he's there, the Japanese pressure is coming. So they realize that Lubang is probably going to be taken by the Japanese soon. He hears rumors of a couple other American officers that might be hiding somewhere. There's a colonel supposedly in another island, and maybe a captain on another island. So he sends letters by courier, but nothing gets back to him. So he decides he's going to go find this colonel. So he jumps on a boat, and he heads out to another island, which I presume to be Mindoro, but I'm actually not sure what island it was. But he gets to the island, talks to some locals. Hey, there's an American colonel here somewhere. They say, yeah, he's up that way. So he takes like this inland route, inland waterways, and comes to this little town where there's this white guy basically as the mayor of the town. He walks in and he says, I'm an American officer. My name is Lieutenant Gause. And the white guy says, oh, I'm Colonel Wells. Pleasure. Glad to have you here. Great. So they kind of hang out there for a while. The 4th of July comes. Rocky goes out to his boat, gets an American flag, runs it up. They sing the national anthem. The Filipinos join in. It's this amazing patriotic display. He's very happy there. About 2 weeks go by, and then another white man comes out of the jungle, and it's Captain Osborne, the other American that he had sent a letter to. So he sees him coming, runs out, gives him a hug. Oh man, I'm so glad to see you. You know, I'm Rocky. I'm Will Osborne. Great. Hey, let me introduce you to this American colonel who's kind of holding this place down. And the moment that they shake hands, there's like an icy cold. And Rocky picks up on it, but doesn't know what's happening. So Wells says, we can all live here as Americans, the three of us. And that seems like a weird thing to say. So later that night, he kind of shepherds Osborne off. He says, hey man, what was that about? He says, that man is a Nazi spy. And I know that because I arrested him a few days before the Japanese landed on Luzon. So he had fled to the Philippines, pretended to be an American. Well, they don't know what to do, but they're alone in the jungle. The man's been nice so far. They say, well, you know, maybe we see where this goes. So they stay about 2 more days. In the middle of the night, Rocky's in, they have a little room with Rocky and Osborne staying. And he's thinking in his mind, how are we going to do this escape, when a figure appears in the doorway. Now, he's not moving because everybody thinks he's asleep, but it's Wells. You can see his outline of his hat in the door. And he looks down and he sees a revolver in Wells's hand. And first he doesn't know what to do. And he sees Wells come into the room, and as he levels the gun, Rocky kind of wakes up and tackles the guy immediately. Osborne starts screaming. Osborne wakes up. They wrestle with the guy, and then the gun goes off right into Wells's belly. Now, they don't wait around to see what happens. They are hot-footing out of there. They get back to Osborne's boat, and they go back to Lubang. Now, while they were there, the Japanese had come onto the island, and they appointed a Japanese governor. So things have been bad in Lubang while they were gone hanging out with Nazis. So they get to Lubang, and they find that it's been absolutely ransacked. There's a Japanese governor that's in charge, but they find that one of the locals had his 20-foot motor skiff stolen, and he would like to steal it back. So he decides that the local is going to help them steal this boat. So they go across to the island that has the boat, they steal it back, then they go to another island, they get fit with supplies, and like, we're going to take this 20-foot skiff 3,000 miles to Australia. That's the plan. When they load up the boat ready to leave, Rita thinks she's going with them, by the way. And they have to now, finally, at the last possible moment, disabuse Rita of the notion that she is going with them to Australia. It's just too dangerous. There's too much that can happen. She's distraught. They hug. She stays on the shore. They sail off. The first stop is Cabra Island up here, where there's a lighthouse. They figure the lighthouse is going to have kerosene. This little motor skiff, which is just a tiny little motorboat, runs on kerosene gas. So they're going to go steal the kerosene that's in there. Well, they get there, they sneak up on the island, and it's not heavily guarded, but there's a Japanese guard inside the lighthouse. So they peek through the window, they see him, he's just reading a book. So they come up with a diversion. So Osborne goes around and knocks on the door. Right when the Japanese guard opens the door, Rocky busts a window on the other side of the lighthouse and starts screaming in some language that no one has ever heard before. The Japanese guard freaks out, doesn't know what's going on. Osborne tackles him. Rocky jumps in through the window. They wrap him up, tie him up, and put him in a closet. Now they've got They've got the rifle they stole from the Japanese guard, and they've got the revolver they took from Wells, and they've doubled their arsenal. They go up to the lighthouse, they steal all the kerosene, whatever else that isn't tied down in terms of food or supplies, they break the light in the lighthouse, and they release 4 Filipinos who've been taken prisoner and forced to work. And then they decide, okay, now to head to Australia. So this is the route that they took. And there's a couple things that happen along this way here. So the first thing is, so by the way, this is Mindoro right here. Lubang was just above that off the map. They stop at this leper colony in Culion. It's the largest leper colony in the Pacific, and the Japanese are afraid of it, so they don't go there. But there's an American doctor who treats them there, so they're able to stay there for a little while, get some care, refit. By the way, this boat is just barely seaworthy, so every time they stop, it's fixing leaks, recalking, trying to get fuel, fixing the rudders. They stay there for a little while, and they push on. On the way down to Palawan Island, they run aground on coral in a storm. Now they can't sink because they're on top of the coral. They're on top of a reef, but the coral is just punching holes in the boat constantly. They have to wait until day. They get off with, try not to cut their feet, push the boat off the coral. They head down to Palawan. When they get to Puerto Princesa, they come across a Japanese garrison. Now on the boat, they had with them an American flag, a counterfeit Japanese flag, and a white flag. So they figured they were covered for all circumstances. So they run up this Japanese flag they had made. And by the way, they're both pretty short. They're bare-chested at this point with no shoes, just shorts. And they got heavy tans. They kind of resemble the Japanese from a distance. So they say, okay, we just sail right past the Japanese garrison, no issues. Around here, they find someone has been pursuing them. And it's a shark that they call Butch. And at first it's fun. He's like a little mascot. And after 3 or 4 days of relentless pursuit, they get a little nervous about Butch. So they start taking pot shots at him, but that doesn't work. Now they had a bunch of caribou that had been dried and preserved on the boat. So he decides he's going to cast a line. And it took only a few minutes that they get Butch on the line. They pull him up onto the deck, but of course he doesn't die right away. He's dangerous on both ends. So they're kind of jumping around. How do we kill this shark? They kill the shark. They eat the shark, which he didn't feel guilty about because, as he wrote, Butch would have done the same to us. So then they get to the very southern tip of Palawan. I think Brooks Point is what it's called. And they come across 6 American POWs. They just emerge from the bush. You got 3 Marines and 3 sailors. And who, among the Marines, would you believe it, but the Marine that discovered him on the island of Corregidor. So after they had surrendered, they became prisoners of war. They sent them to a labor camp on Palawan. These 6 had escaped. And they decide they're going to raise hell against the Japanese. Now, Osborne and Gause say, hey, we got this boat. Why don't you come on? We're gonna go. And they say, no. We got Americans. We have friends in that camp. We're going to go get them out. And what do you have to help us? So they're like, well, they had picked up 2 more rifles on the way. So they said, here's 2 rifles. Go with God. And they disappeared off into the bush, and they pushed off back out to sea. So they got a little brave at this point. They were doing like this island hopping thing. So they thought they'd push a few islands along the way. But suddenly the weather is really great. The winds are really favorable. It's like, you know what? We can just go into open waters. And around the time the swells got to 15 feet, they realized that was a bad idea because there was a typhoon. And the typhoon, number one, it was rocking them all over. They were lashing themselves to the boats that didn't get blown over. They're constantly working the tiller motor to try and keep this thing upright, and it's just rocking back and forth. And suddenly, a strong gust sucks the sails right off of this thing. Again, this thing has a motor, but it's not really a motorboat. They are sailing with potato sacks as sails. But once the storm sucks the sails away, the ship kind of rights itself, like, oh, it's not so bad. So they think, hey, this might not be too bad. And then the next gust snaps the mast in half, and like, oh, well, maybe it is still pretty rough. So they're working the rudder, and he's just all his bodily strength to keep this rudder straight, to keep the boat going. And then suddenly, it's not very hard at all. And he leans over and he realizes the rudder has snapped off completely. So then he quickly, in this storm, fashions a bamboo rudder. The next day, they're still alive. They have swept ashore on an island several miles off course, but at least they know where they are, and they decide, okay, they're going to head back. So they push back toward Borneo. That's this island over here. This is Borneo. On the way to Borneo, now they're leaving the friendly American waters and American-friendly waters, I should say, of the Philippines. They're entering very Japanese, heavily controlled areas. A Japanese submarine breaches the surface right beside them, nearly swamps the vessel. and then disappears before they know it. But now they realize it's too hairy for us to just go in the open. Now they only travel at night, and they hide in coves and caves during the day. For the most part, the travel along Borneo is pretty safe. They're fast, they're doing their own thing, they're working along the coastline in caves by night, and they're able to resupply. But the supplies they're getting in Borneo are food and fresh water and fruit, but what they're not getting is repair parts, gasoline, kerosene, things like that. So they're starting to have some supply issues to keep the boat afloat. When they get to the southern edge of the island there, just below the equator, they come across a schooner, and probably with a 200-man crew, and they get an idea. They say, well, we're in Japanese waters. Maybe these guys are afraid of the Japanese. So they run up that Japanese flag, and they pull up alongside the vessel. Rocky takes the hat that he has, he pulls it down low over one eye, real cocksure. Osborne stays on the boat. He pulls up aside and signals. They throw down a ladder for him, and he climbs up aboard the boat. And of course, they're Filipino. They don't speak, or from Papua New Guinea or Borneo or something. They don't speak either English or Japanese, so they don't know. But he pretends to be Japanese. And he starts barking orders at them, and they're all locked up. They don't know what to do. Meanwhile, Osborne is down below, and he would poke his head out. They had the front of the boat, if you can see, the back half of the boat was kind of covered, like a little cabin area that was sheltered from the storm. So Osborne would poke his head out and yell something, and then he'd pop back in and put on a hat, and poke his head out of a different part and yell something, and pop back in and change his shirt. And he would pop back out and yell something else. So giving the impression they had this large crew on the boat, Rocky's up on the deck. He's got his revolver tucked into his belt like Jean Lafitte, and he starts barking orders, and he realized no one's really understanding what he's saying, obviously. So he just reaches out and slaps the captain in the face. And then he starts searching the boat on his own. He pulls out sugar and kerosene and all the things that he needs, starts throwing them down to the boat, down to Osborne on the boat. And on the way out, everyone's still kind of frozen. He doesn't know what else to do to kind of close the chapter on this. So he looks at the first sailor he sees and just punches him square in the jaw. And he says, so long as they thought we were Japanese, we didn't want them to think there was anything good about us. So knocked him in the jaw, got back down on the boat, and sailed off. Now, as soon as they're making a break, now they got some more open water, and wouldn't you know it, they run into another typhoon. And this one isn't as bad as the first one. Now they're typhoon experts, right? They got two under their belt, but they figure, what are we going to do? We got to find shelter. So they sail their way quickly to the closest island they can find, which has kind of an eerie glow to it. Turns out it's because it's an erupting volcano. So they spend 3 days on the leeward side of a volcano. They could see the glow against the clouds at night and the embers sparking up, but it was safe. They were dryish. They were on dry land. There was terra firma beneath them, so that was good enough. Then they navigate through the waters here. Now, I want to show you here, the last little stretch here is about 600 miles of open sea. Some of you are sailors in the room. I am not. But I understand that deep water is a little more dangerous, and it's harder to navigate. And by the way, there's no shelter. So they realize they've got to make this sprint across 600 miles to get down to Australia, and they can be spotted along the way by Japanese patrols. So sure enough, they are spotted by some scout planes. The plane flies off to report to the air base. At night, they're looking for them with spotlights. And they've got nowhere to hide, but they just get lucky, and no one finds them. The next morning, they're out again, and another scout plane comes over, spots them, and immediately peels off. And they're like, oh, now our goose is cooked. We got nothing for us, with nothing to hide. When wouldn't you know it, what happened? A little baby typhoon comes in and provides cloud cover, and they were so excited by the rain and the storm that they could hide in, and the planes couldn't fly in or couldn't find them, so they managed to escape again. So now they get confident. They're like 100 miles out maybe from Australia, and they say, hey, we're going to bring down the Japanese flag. We're going to fly an American flag. Surely soon we'll be spotted by an American or an Australian boat. But that was a poor assumption. So there was a Japanese patrol that was headed out somewhere, and a single plane spots them, peels off from formation, and does a strafing run right against them, and just peppers the boat. It starts swamping and listing to one side. The motor's on fire. It spins around, does another pass, strafes it some more. They're patching these holes, by the way. They had a broomstick, and they would put a broomstick in the hole and then break it off, and put a broomstick in a hole and break it off. And that's how they were sealing these bullet holes. But at this point, the boat is like 3/4 underwater. The plane thinks its job is done. It flies home. But these guys are experts now on swamped vessels and at-sea repairs. So they're bailing as fast as they can. They're patching holes. They would swim underneath the craft to patch them. They finally get the boat upright again, and they make it all the way to Australia. And I think that's the end of the slide. Yeah, they make it to Australia. They think they're going to run into somebody right away. They don't. Australia's big, as it happens. So they start cruising eastward on the shoreline until they finally run into an Australian patrol somewhere who is just confused as hell to see these guys pop out of nowhere. They feed them, and then they feed them again. And then they take them all the way to Wyndham, which is down just right at the southern tip of the map. That's where the American base was. And somebody walks them straight into MacArthur's office. So MacArthur's at his desk. And here's this dude, look, just like up at the top left there, with no shirt, no shoes, just Daisy Duke shorts and a hat. And he walks in and he salutes and he says, "Sir, Lieutenant Gause reporting for duty from Corregidor." MacArthur returns the salute, stands up, and he says, "Well, I'll be damned." That's it. Thanks.
Very entertaining.
Thank you.
God bless.